133. Diderot, The Gardener and the Worm. Chalcedon Report number 142, June 1977. Humanism exalts man as sovereign, but, in practice, this means that it is some men, an elite group, who rule as sovereign, as the working god of the social order. Most humanists are unwilling to state their case so boldly. Nietzsche, however, did. Among his manuscripts collected after his death was a piece of paper stating simply, "Since the old God has been abolished, I am prepared to rule the world." Nietzsche recognized that the growth towards democracy in his day was also the denial of God and the exaltation of man, which meant the great opportunity for the elite man, the tyrant. He held, "The democratization of Europe is at the same time an involuntary preparation for the rearing of tyrants, taking the word in all its meanings, even in its most spiritual sense." Of men in general, he held, one has no right to existence or to work, to say nothing of a right to, quote, happiness, end quote. The individual human being is in precisely the same case as the lowest worm. If there is no God, then there is no absolute law protecting any man or anything from any use demanded by any power. As Dostoevsky saw, if there is no God, then everything is permitted. Earlier, the same point had been made in the 1760s by Diderot in Rameau's Nephew. In his dialogue, the nephew, a nihilist, gives us the thesis of the book. There is no difference between a gardener who prunes the garden and the worms who perform the same task by feeding on the leaves. The philosopher cannot say that the worm is not equal to the gardener. This short novel was translated from the French by Goethe. Hegel was delighted with it, and Marx found it a joy. Why? After all, these men were, in a sense, gardeners, philosophical gardeners. Were they demoting themselves? On the contrary, they were demoting God and absolute law, moral standards and human integrity. By calling the worm equal to the gardener, the worm was not exalted, rather, all moral standards were subverted. The worm and the gardener were made equally meaningless and equally free from God's law. When a gardener and a worm are both cut loose from all restraints, considerations, laws and standards, it is not the worms who win, but the gardeners. This was clearly demonstrated by Robespierre and other, quote, gardeners, end quote, in the French Revolution. Otto J. Scott in Robespierre, The Voice of Virtue, has shown how the revolutionary gardeners treated their human worms. Humanistic democracy has moved very rapidly into fascist and socialist statism, with the masses of men being called sovereigns, while disposed of as worms. But this is not all. Rameau's nephew, Nietzsche and others, the Marquis de Sade included, all argued that, because there is no God, there is no law. This is not altogether an honest argument. What they meant, rather, was that, because there was, for them, no God, this meant that God's law was invalid. This cleared the ground for a new lawgiver, man. The, quote, gardener, end quote, now made the laws, and the chief gardener, the dictator, legislator, president, prime minister or chairman, declared what law should be and how his law would create a new Garden of Eden. According to the Bible, the world is God's creation and totally under his law. The Garden of Eden was to be tended entirely in terms of his purpose and law, and made the exemplar and testing area in terms of which the whole world was to be brought under dominion by man in terms of God's rule and law. The head gardener was thus declared to be God. In this garden, man is not a worm, but a creature made in the image of God, created for knowledge, righteousness, holiness, and dominion. Diderot's garden abolished God and instituted a democracy, but a meaningless one. Since gardener and worm are alike meaningless and the same, and no objective values exist, the only function and pragmatic value is power. The goal of Diderot's disciples thus became power, and the test of power was the ability to control and prune the garden and the worms, and to kill all who resisted. The original and full slogan of the French Revolution was thus almost honest: liberty, fraternity, equality, or death. It should have read liberty, fraternity, equality, and death. When all values are reduced to nothing, then only power establishes value, and death is the means whereby this new value is applied. Prospective gardeners over the planned humanistic Garden of Eden have since been busy defining who the worms are, depending on their particular humanistic starting points. For some, the human worms are the capitalists. For others, the lower classes. Others define the human worms as a particular race, nationality, or colour, a religious group or a vocation, that is, bankers, lawyers, doctors, or what have you. In any case, it is some men who have become expendable in the name of freedom and equality. Rameau's nephew saw the whole world and life as absurd and meaningless. Nothing is more absurd in such a world as any attempt to maintain moral standards and values. Freedom means freedom from God's law. Camus, in The Rebel, drew the logical conclusion in the 20th century. Freedom for atheistic, existential man is from God and from God's law, from righteousness and the idea of the good. It thus means freedom to do evil, freedom to create a demonic world. The, quote, free, end quote, spirits of the modern world thus delight in evil, pornography, occultism, and Satanism. For us, however, there can be no freedom except under God and His law. Life apart from God is hell, and man's pretensions to be God are insanity. Nietzsche was prepared to be God and to rule the world, regarding other men as equal to the lowest worm. Nietzsche ended in a mental institution, hopelessly insane and under the jurisdiction of custodians with a better philosophy than Nietzsche's. Because God reigns, His law governs, and His kingdom shall prevail. If you live apart from God and His law, you will be living in Nietzsche's world. Wherefore, come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 17.